Mother-in-law moves in after husband lies about losing job. User 6 blames me, so I decide I'm done. And then the front door slammed behind me, and I struggled to control my breathing, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The house was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, like it was bursting with all the words we hadn't said yet. I knew exactly where he was, not at work like he'd promised this morning, but probably drowning his sorrows at Larry Al's bar again. "Damn it, Scott," I muttered, throwing my handbag on the kitchen counter. "Mrs. Noah, this is Virginia from Midwest Insurance. I'm calling to follow up on the claim your husband filed last week regarding his dismissal." My stomach twisted. Scott had said he had quit his job 3 weeks ago, claiming his boss was impossible to work with. I had doubted him at the time. It was the third job he had lost in his many years, but I wanted to believe him. I always wanted to believe him. Another message beeped. "Janet, darling, it's your mum." I deleted Diane's message, feeling my blood boil. Of course, she was on his side. In her eyes, Scott could do no wrong, and everything was somehow my fault. The front door creaked open, and I braced myself, Scott stumbling in, the smell of whiskey clinging to him like a skin. "Ich know you got sacked. Why did you leave me?" His face fell. Guilt settled in his tired red-rimmed eyes. "I didn't want to disappoint you again." I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the tears threaten to spill out. How can we trust each other if you can even be honest about something like this? Scott collapsed on the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry. Janet, I really messed up this time, I said, my voice rising. "Scott, it's always this time. We can't goon living like this." He mumbled something about a missed deadline and an angry sent the same story just on a different day. I paced the living room, my thoughts racing. We need to make some changes. I can't be the only one with a reliable income around here. You need to. The phone rang, cutting me off. Scott jumped for it like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. "Hello, Mum," he said, giving me a look that pleaded for a break in the argument. I rolled my eyes and stormed into the kitchen. Needing some space, I poured a glass of water, trying to calm myself. Scott's voice drifted in from the living room, muffled but clear enough. "Yes, Janet's here. She's found out about the job." There was a pause, and then his tone dropped. "No, I haven't told her that part yet." I froze. I gripped the glass tightly. What else was he hiding from me? My heart pounding as I listened to Mom. "I don't think that's a good idea," Scott continued, his voice urgent. "Janet won't. I know you're trying to help." But I stormed back into the living room, my anger boiling over. "What, Scott? What genius plan has your mother come up with now?" "Nothing. It's nothing. Mum, I've got to go," he said, quickly hanging up before looking at me. "Janet, it's exactly what I asked for." My voice sharp. "What are you not telling me?" He fidgeted with the phone cord, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mum thought it might be a good idea if she came to stay with us for a while, to help out." The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the shards and water scattered at my feet, reflecting how broken I felt inside. "Your mother," I said slowly, the disbelief in my voice evident, "wants to move in with us." Scott nodded miserably, "Just until I get back on my feet." I stared at him, my mouth open in shock. It was a nightmare, the thought of Diane living with her constant judgment and snide remarks. "Janet, please," Scott begged, "it won't be for long. We need the help, and there is no we in this decision." "Scott," I cut him off, my voice cold. "You and your mother don't get to decide how we deal with your mistakes." I stepped over the broken glass, my anger driving me towards the door. "Clean this up," I said over my shoulder. "I need some air." I said over my shoulder, "I need some air." "Janet, wait," Scott called as I grabbed my keys and reached for the door handle. "Where are you going?" I paused, the weight of his question hanging in the air. I didn't turn around to figure out how to fix the mess you've made of our lives, and with that, I walked out the door, slamming it behind me. The next morning, I stormed into my office, my head pounding. My head pounding from a sleepless night. The last thing I needed was to deal with Diane's judgmental attitude on top of Scott's lies. But as if on cue, her number flashed up on my phone, the screen glowing insistently. "Janet speaking." I answered stiffly, bracing myself. "Janet, dear," Diane's voice dripped with false concern. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. Your very important work." I gritted my teeth. "What can I do for you, Diane?" "I'm worried about Scott. He's been so down lately. I can't help but wonder if your career focus is affecting him." My grip on the phone tightened. Excuse me. Well, you know how men are. Diane went on, oblivious to the anger building inside me. You need support. Look, Scott's always been sensitive. Maybe if you were at home more, Diane. I cut her off, my voice low and controlled. Scott is a grown man. His job problems are his own responsibility. But as his wife, I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. I've supported us financially for years, while Scott has jumped from job to job. Don't you dare suggest that this is my fault? Is it my fault? Diane gasped, clearly offended. I'm just trying to help Janet. Someone has to be there for Scott. And if you're too busy trying to climb the corporate ladder, then stop right there. I've snapped. My career isn't the problem. Scott's inability to hold down a job is. And frankly, Diane, your constant babying isn't helping him either. I never, she huffed, her indignation palpable. If that's the way you feel, maybe I should come and stay with you for a while. Scott clearly needs support at home. A shiver ran down my spine. That won't be necessary, I said firmly. Scott and I can handle our own problems. We'll see. Diane replied in a threatening tone before hanging up. I slammed the phone down, furious at the nerve of this woman to blame me after everything I'd done to keep us together. Everything I'd done to keep us afloat. My phone buzzed with a text from Scott. Mom was worried about us. Maybe we should let her visit. I ignored it and threw myself into my work. I spent the rest of the day drowning in spreadsheets and phone calls. Anything to take my mind off the mess at home. By the time I pulled into the driveway that evening, it was nearly 9 p.m. I froze, my stomach churning at the sight of Diane's car parked in its usual spot. Dread gripped me as I walked inside to find them in the kitchen, Scott nervously stirring a pot while Diane set the table. What's going on? I asked, dropping my briefcase with a loud thud. Diane turned to me beaming. Janet, darling, we were wondering when you were going to grace us with your presence. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of preparing dinner. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of preparing dinner. You certainly took the liberty, I muttered, glaring at Scott, who refused to look at me, suddenly very interested in whatever it was he was cooking. Scott mentioned that you two were having some difficulties, Diane said, her tone dripping with concern. I thought a nice family dinner might help ease the tension. I let out a bitter laugh. A family dinner, is that what this is? Scott finally looked up. Please, Janet Mums? I was just trying to help. Help, I lost it. Ambushing me in my own home, blaming me for your problems. Diane gasped. I would never save her. I cut her off. I've heard enough. You've made it pretty clear how you feel about me this morning. I turned to Scott. You invited her without even asking me. Didn't you? His guilty look said it all. My hand shook with anger as I grabbed my keys. Janet, wait, Scott called as I headed for the door. Where are you going? The door, where are you going? He asked desperately in his voice. I paused with my hand on the doorknob somewhere. I'm actually wanted. I replied coldly. Enjoy your family dinner. I slammed the door behind me, and as I walked away, I heard Diane's voice following me. Well, I never. Scott, darling, you really need to do something about that wife of yours. I got into my car, driving tears blurring my vision. How had my life come to this? How had my life come to this? And more importantly, how was I going to fix it? The next day, after a long day at work, I pulled into the driveway, my stomach churning at the sight of Diane's car still parked there. She'd been here for a week now, and each day felt more unbearable than the last. Overflowing with clothes, boxes stacked high, and framed pictures of her and Scott covering every surface. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice echoing through the house. Scott came out of the kitchen looking embarrassed. Janet, darling, I can explain. Scott invited me to stay for a while. Diane cut in, sweeping into the room with a smug smile. Isn't it wonderful? Now I can help out around the house and give you more time to focus on your career? More time to concentrate on your career. I felt the blood drain from my face. Stay for how long? Scott shuffled his feet, avoiding my eyes. Well, you see, Mom's having some financial problems. I thought she could live with us until she gets back on her feet. Live with us. I repeated, my voice rising. Scott, we can barely support ourselves. How are we going to support your mother, too? Diane clicked her tongue, her tone condescending. Now, Janet, Condescending now. Janet, there's no need to be so dramatic. I'm sure if we tighten our belts, we can make it work. After all, family comes first. It turned to face her, my hands shaking. This isn't your decision. Diane, this is our home, mine. And Scott's, of course, dear, she said, her voice patronizing. But Scott agrees it's for the best, isn't its wheat heart. Scott nodded weakly, and something inside me snapped. How dare you, I said, stepping closer to him. How dare you make this decision without talking to me? Methus is my house, too. Scott, my life. Please, Janet, Scott begged. Mum needs our help. We can't just turn our backs on her. The way you turned your back on your responsibilities is hot back, or the way you turned your back on our marriage by lying to Diane, gasped Janet. That's now way to talk to your husband. I whirled around to face her, and you come waltzing in here, criticizing my decisions, blaming me for Scott's failures, and you expect me to support you. I'm just trying to help. Diane sniffled at there. Someone has to hold this family together. We were doing fine before you came along. Is napped. Scott stepped between us, his voices shaking. Janet, that's enough. Mu staying, and that's final. I stared at them. Disbelief and betrayal flooded through my final. You don't get to make this decision on your own. Scott, well, someone has to make decisions around here. He shrugged. You're never home anyway. His words shit me like a punch in the gut. I stepped back, grabbing my purse. I'm never home because I'm working. I'm never home because I'm working. I'm never home because I work my butt off to keep us going while you hop from one job to another. Janet, wait, Scott started, but I was already heading for the door. No, Scott, I'm done waiting. I'm done being the bad guy in all this. I paused at the door. It turned back to them. Buth, you want to play happy family with Mummy, dearest? Fine, but don't expect me to stick around and watch. Where are you going? Scott called after me to a hotel. I replied coldly, as it seems, I'm no longer welcome in my own home.